right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are noticing, we are live a little bit earlier than usual, and we're going to have to cut this session a little bit short today because we've got other appointments that Andre and I have got to get to. So that's why we've pulled a quick one on you and going live a little bit earlier and to cut it short a little bit today. But Andre, how are you doing this week, my friend?
I'm absolutely fabulous. Excited to be alive. Um, there are things that could cause one to be depressed, to be upset, to be concerned. Just in your state of Kansas, Kansas and Missouri. I mean,
Correct.
there have been some really gut-wrenching things, and I think some of what we'll have to do to kind of overcome some of that stuff we'll address today. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation, in spite of um, the the negative things that are happening around us.
Hence why I'm wearing this shirt today. Death to racism, right? We've got to talk
Death,
about how we address racism. But before we address racism, we've heard the term hurt people,
hurt people.
hurt people, hurt people. So we've got to talk about, and you and I have talked about this idea a while ago, right? Is how do you heal the hurts of racism? Because you can't help people, especially as practitioners, you and I, and others that are listening, you can't expect to be helping people if you're hurt yourself. If you're still struggling through some of that yourself, right? And because your bias can come into the picture,
Recording in
your
progress.
your experience, your lived experiences come into the picture, and then that's influencing the way you show up and how you advise or help others through this work. So, how do you heal yourself through the experiences of discrimination, racism, and sexism, and other things? But specifically for this conversation, healing hurts of racism. How do you heal yourself before you move on and help others?
Yeah. So first, I think it's interesting that what folks don't realize is that this is a practice that one has to undertake, right? So to in any change behavior change model or whatnot, you have to make the assessment that there's something that requires you to change,
Yeah.
that there is a necessity for me to augment or change my behavior. And until we're able to get to that point, we'll never do that. So we'll never be able to heal. For some of us, impacting racism, or being perpetrators of racism does not mean that we are racist. What
Mm-hmm.
it But we will be judged not by what our intentions are, but by what we do, right? So for some folks, we may have racist or xenophobic tendencies, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are racist. And we can talk more about that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I really want to focus on us not being the sum total of our mistakes, but being the sum total of our attentions aligned with our values and ultimately aligned with our goals demonstrated through our behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about the healing the hurts of racism, many of us have been in diversity trainings where we discover how we're either alike or we're different, or that we have certain kinds of biases or whatever.
Yeah.
And after those trainings, still left with the question, what do I do with that now?
Yeah.
Right. And in certain cases, particularly when microaggressions are occurring, it's great to have that cognitive piece that, oh, I could be committing microaggressions, or what I said was a microaggression. But ultimately, if it's not changing my behavior, then one could attest that I haven't learned anything. Right. And so when we think about this notion of healing the hurts of racism, it's not about training. There's certain kinds of interactions that we have with people, certain kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things that happen that information doesn't help, doesn't solve. Right.
Yeah.
But when we've committed hurts against our social agreements of being respectful, of, you do you, boo, or, let live and let live, when we come against those have to be healed. Those relationships have to be have to be healed. You have to think about that. And so, Laura, when you think about the concept of those words, healing the hurts of racism, what comes up for you as you think about
So I
this
think
as a process?
again, that's what I said earlier, right? As we kicked off this conversation, is I think part of it is uh, one, understanding and accepting your own experiences with race and racism, right? Whether you have been the perpetrator, knowingly or unknowingly, or you've been on the victim side, receiving end of that, and how that has made you feel over those experiences. And then to your point about microaggressions, sometimes that person that I met for the first time, right, now comes in the cognitive piece you talked about. That person that I just met asked me, and I get this all the time, where are you from? That person knows nothing about me, right? But for me, I've have heard that question so many different times, and sometimes with ill intentions. But that person is it's the first time we're meeting, so I have to be cognitive about that interaction with that person for the first time. That I don't automatically throw onto him or her, oh, this is a racist person. This is a person who is ignorant. This person is, they're just curious, right? So how do I be aware enough about myself and the experiences, that's the context, we've talked about this a lot too, Andre, you and I, over our time together, is the context in which these conversations, these relationships, these interactions are happening also is important, right? So am I aware enough that this is happening in a context in which this person is meeting me for the first time? That's very different than this person who I've known for 10 years, and I've told them about different things about who I am and where I come from, but continues to perpetuate some of the microaggressions that we see in some of our organizations, right? Now that's a different conversation that needs to be had. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I think you're trying to get to. And I believe that's part of the work is in this healing is understanding your own, what you bring to the table, your own experiences, your own biases, your own experiences around racism as a perpetrator and as a victim, and how you may show up, right? And then how do we start to heal ourselves? Then we can move outside of ourselves.
Yeah. And I like to think of that relationship between the person who is either knowingly or unknowingly perpetrating racism and their target,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you can target me, but I don't I won't be your victim.
Yep.
I'm not playing that card. That's your problem,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So there is that. I think the other thing that is important to, as we think about this notion of healing the hurts of racism, is first acknowledging that there has been pain that has been caused either by systemic actions,
Mm-hmm.
historic systemic actions, and personal actions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I have
Mm-hmm.
personally done some things, and so recognizing that there has been harm and that I have been a player in that. Now,
Yeah.
I want to tell you that takes a level of humility, a level of insight to be able to say that I have been a part of the challenge, right? And so, as a man, I would say, and we could talk about this a little bit later in our conversation. I would say, particularly early on in my career, that I was an ally to women,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
However, my sisters could demonstrate to me how my allyship was coming up short.
That's what sisters can do for you.
Yep. And so I have to listen to that
Yeah.
with humility because I want to get better.
Yeah.
Um, there are some folks who are so full of fear that have been pumped with so much anxiety, right? They're coming for your stuff. They want what's yours. When you see them, know that they don't have the best intentions. They're to the point where people aren't making really healthy decisions for themselves or for the communities that they're in, right? And so that's how we get that's how we get kids looking to pick up their siblings on the wrong street. Now, this is the interesting thing in Minneapolis, specifically, not so much St. Paul,
Hmm.
where it's on a grid system,
Yeah.
right? So you have streets and you have
Yeah.
avenues, or is it streets and avenues,
Either
right?
way, it's still all
So
streets run the same way, all avenues. Yeah.
yep. So if you're on like the east side of the same street, you're in a different part of the city.
Hmm.
If you're on the west side of the same street, you're in another part of the city. And if you're on the street with the same name and you're on the avenue versus the street, you're on a different part of the city, right?
Yeah.
And so there have been tons of times where I have found myself at the right address but on the wrong street,
Yep.
right? And fortunately here in Minnesota, and the way that the armor that I wear, which is my clothing and attire, has been a buffer to some of the types of things that could have happened. I hate the fact that we have to have the talk,
Yeah.
right? I think Procter and Gamble did a really good job, and maybe we'll share that in the links. But they did a really good job illustrating what this talk is
Hmm.
about, how Black folks need to tell each other and have told each other for generations how to be safe in the world.
Yep.
Right now, we're going to add something to that list, which is keep your phone charged, because that's not on the list of the talk.
Yeah.
And I know that other BIPOC communities have also had to do that. And I wonder if my white brothers and sisters have had the talk in reverse, in some respects,
That'd
right?
be a curious conversation to have with on another show.
Yeah, yeah. So what does the white talk look like? Because I know what the black talk looks like.
Hmm.
It looks like keep your hands in your pockets, but then don't keep your hands in your pockets too long. It,
Yep.
it is smile and look people in the eye, even if they're snarling at you. Confronting. There's all of these social things that are so unfair, but they're designed to keep folks alive. And I want to tell you, I'm tired of being in the survival mode, which is why I was like, let's heal the hurts of racism.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people say, Andre, who is your audience for this healing the hurts of racism? And I'm going to be quite honest. The audience for this healing the hurts of racism is me. Right?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, though, we have to heal ourselves before we can help others, right?
Yep.
And so often the times when we do this work, it is about ourselves first, then it is about others.
Yep. Yep. So, a number of ways that we're trying to because here's the thing: if I don't take control of what the media is feeding me,
Yeah.
and if I don't take control of my responses to those things, I will either explode like a Coke and Mentos, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll explode, or I will implode, which means that I take all that stuff and I start to wither away inside with anger, with anxiety, with what. And I think all of those emotions are important. I
Yeah.
don't think we should shy away from them. They give us information that is crucial to our survival. However, when I let those things overtake me, then I'm not able to make the most rational decisions based on my values,
Yeah.
based on my intentions, based on my goals, and ultimately my behaviors. Right. So those are extremely important for us to think about and engage, which is why we decided to do this healing process.
Let me throw something out there right real quick before we move on to kind of you sharing through some slides here. But um, I worry, and this is interesting because I had this conversation with my kids the other day, with all the school shootings and now the shooting here in my neighboring state of Missouri. Um, and then in I think Alabama, we just had another mass shooting, right? Have we become numb? have we become so, this is so much the norm that it doesn't shock us anymore? That it's, oh, it's another shooting, it's another blah blah blah, whatever it is, right? It's another racist incident that we just saw. It's another. Have we become? I'm worried about that piece too. Like, you talked about feelings and how do you heal those hurts of racism. I'm worried that the numbness to it and it becomes such a normal part of the day to day interactions that we have just come to accept it as is.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly where we are, right? And so it become and so, if you recall, Rodney King being beaten by L.A. County
Yeah,
uh, folks, that was so jarring because we'd
yeah,
never seen anything like that before,
yeah. I
right?
think it was a first, like, well, besides the um, civil rights movement with the dogs and fire hoses and,
Yep.
but since modern day age, how about that with the
Yeah,
modern age TV and all that?
and
Probably one of
even
the
Emmett
first.
Till, right?
Yeah.
So even Emmett Till. So when we think about, like, we do become numb to the sense of violence in the United States, right? One of my favorite movies more recently is John Wick,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was John Wick too. And I'm not coming against the movie, and I'm not a hypocrite. I'm just telling this is me. But I think the body count in number two, his the second movie was like 230, something like. Somebody can
Wow.
fact check me and tell me if that
Wow.
what that actual number was. But I think it was over like 230 something bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of simulated killing
Mm-hmm.
with all of the sweets that go with it, right? Because he's justified because they killed his dog,
Mm-hmm.
they stole his car. It sounds like a great country song, right? And blew up his house, right? So he's justified for doing all that stuff. So I do think that it is these. It becomes so commonplace that these hiccups,
Mm-hmm.
Emmett Till, the 64 People's uh, Poverty March.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't quote me on that date. I mean, on the year. The Rodney King, uh, Philando Castile, George Floyd.
Yeah.
Like, these are all these spikes in the noise that got our attentions, and unfortunately, not only are those things ramping up, but what it takes to get our attention is even more severe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when people are able to look at Kyle Rittenhouse as a hero for interjecting himself into across state lines as a young man with a gun,
Underage, minor.
underage,
Yeah.
all of these things, and he can be a hero in the same context. Um, we have a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when even a homeowner in a so-called stand your ground state can shoot someone
Without
without,
asking, without anything. Yep.
right, and without getting booked,
Yep. For, what,
right?
4 days or whatever it is until
Yeah,
he got
without,
charged?
right.
Yep.
So so there's a slowdown, and so I want to tell you, and I'll be really frank and honest about this. Is sometimes racism keeps us in cages we should get out of, and keeps us out of cages that we should get in,
Mm.
right? Or maybe not even cages. That's not a, but keeps us in things that we should be getting out of, and out of things that we should be getting in. For example, relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you and I are, I would consider us friends. Our families know each other.
Mm-hmm.
We've broken bread together.
Yep.
We've interacted, and growing up, I didn't know any Asian folks. And I certainly didn't know any Hmong folks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I stayed in that box that I was presented with as a young man,
Yep.
you and I would have never, right?
Yep.
And so racism had I had to get over racism so that we could have the kind of relationship
Correct.
that our families have,
Correct.
right? And so that's what I mean by keeping us in things that maybe we should get out of, and out of things that we should be getting into. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think part of that is recognizing that we need to be gracious to ourselves and heal
Yeah. Yeah.
and heal.
So how do we do that? Let's talk a little bit about um, the steps, the tools in which we offer people that they can start to heal themselves. Again, like we talked about earlier, heal themselves, and then eventually, in concert with others, start to explore how do you heal each other in this space, in this relationship with race and racism, because we're going to encounter people who we've never encountered before, right? And so how do you get into that cognitive space in which you can interact appropriately in those manners? So
Yeah, so let me go ahead and share my screen, um, because I think it's important for us to recognize that this healing process is not just for people targeted by racism, right?
mm-hmm.
That racism negatively impacts white people too.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps them in things they should get out of and out of things that they might be interested in, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they should get into. And so when we think about this healing the hurts of racism, it is not just um, BIPOC folks, but it's also our white brothers and sisters who need to heal from the hurts of racism,
Sure.
right? And people will argue, Laura, about like reverse discrimination and or reverse racism, and I'm not interested in spending a whole lot of time in that space. What I am interested in is how do you deal with the negative impacts of being an outsider? How do you deal with the negative impacts in an organization of being bullied?
Yeah.
How have you dealt with it within an organization? How um, how you've been belittled
Yep.
because it's all happened to many of us, either as the perpetrator of that,
Yep.
knowingly or unknowingly,
Yep.
and also as the target of those things.
Correct.
So, whether reverse discrimination exists or not, that's a conversation for somebody else to kind of get into. But I am interested in how people are dealing with their feelings around.
Yes. I agree with you, Andre, because whether you call it reverse racism or it's still racism, right? It is still racism, and so whether you are on the perpetrator or the victim side, or allow people to be so, what are those tools we need to move on beyond the I feel bad about myself, or I feel bad about being the perpetrator, right? That
Yeah.
or when I get called out, or when I've learned that I was, whether it's intentional or unintentionally done. What are
Yep.
those tools? Let's walk
So
through
so
this.
so let's walk through these tools for when training is not enough, right?
Yep.
So we know that racism is a complex and pervasive issue and has impacted individuals and communities for generations. Its effects are far-reaching and can manifest in a variety of ways. And I'll let folks kind of read this when they go to the website. Um, what we're interested in is thinking about mindfulness, not blame. And the interesting thing about that is that there are tons of folks that we can point the fingers at.
Yep.
But the interesting thing is, that my grandmama said, baby, when you point one finger at somebody else, you got three pointing right back at you. Right. And so ultimately it is we will be judged by our behaviors, right? And you'll hear people say, well, I don't look at people's races. I look to see if they're a good person or a bad person.
Mm.
Yep. That same
Colorblind.
microphone, that same microscope is on you too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we will be judged by our approach, but mindfulness is what we believe. It can be helpful. And so what mindfulness really requires of us is to have a deep understanding of the impacts of our exposure to racism and our lives, how we've been negatively impacted by xenophobia,
Mm-hmm.
racism,
Mm-hmm.
um, sexism, homophobia, how all of those have really, if not dealt with, can have some negative impacts on our health and our well being and our relationships. Right.
Yep.
And so we provide skill development. So these are skills you can gain, these are practices that you can undertake to increase your ability to be effective in talking about how we heal from racism, right?
Hmm.
So there are I'm going to skip down here just for a second. There are a number of ways in which we heal. Why heal? Why not just train? Why not just educate? Well, healing requires that deep work that if you ever look at a scar and when it heals, it may not be perfect, but it is perfectly closed. It is
But it's still
perfectly,
there.
but it's still there, and it is a reminder.
Yep.
So we're not saying that racism doesn't exist, that these other isms aren't a problem. What we are saying is let's make sure that we heal from them, but remember that
Yep.
they're still there because they will remind us.
Yep.
But we need to heal. So I could be the mad guy all day long. Um, but if I'm not working to heal, then I'm not being helpful. So the work has to be done with me. And so the first thing is recognizing the pain that racism has either caused or inflicted, either
Hmm.
on myself or on others. So recognizing the pain. The second is looking at and forgiving ourselves with radical empathy, right? So when racism has been enacted on me, it's not my fault.
Yep.
I didn't necessarily have to do anything, but it's the nature of where the space is, and so I have to be able to forgive myself. I also have to be able to forgive and not forget individuals who are acting on their racist ideas and their racist tendencies, right? The third thing, so we have this 5 week program, and each of the weeks we kind of go through each of the principles of how to build those skills to become to heal the hurts of racism. And so that also means uh, allowing other folks to be different than what they were before. So giving some radical empathy to those
Yep.
individuals, recognizing that they are a lot like me, and so the things that I am concerned about are typically things that they are concerned about as well. Um, and lastly is this integration. So ultimately, what are you going to do with your newfound um, appreciation or acknowledgement of your participation in race and racism, but also who is calling you an ally. So how do you start to build partnerships that allow you to continually heal, right? And and so we walk through those 5 weeks, those five processes. And so there's an app that you can download. There'll be exercises on the website that you can engage in, journal entries.
Hmm.
So it's 5 weeks. There are 25 affirmations and meditations. If you want an example, you can go to our YouTube channel and look there
Yep.
under our meditations. But that's the crux is we want to help people heal the hurts of racism as opposed to continually uh, putting band-aids on things and patching up stuff and talking about these one-offs, but let's actually heal the hurts of racism.
So, so I know that people are probably wondering, what's the difference between this and a training where I learn to talk about race and racism, where I learn to understand bias and where that comes from. All right, any of those trainings that you see, especially in corporate America today, with its unconscious bias being so popular,
Yeah,
what's the difference between this and a training program? And if
I
you
would say
stop
that.
sharing, I'm going to go back to
Oh yeah, I'll stop
yeah.
sharing.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so what's the difference between training and something like this, where we take them through 5 weeks of healing, if I can use
yeah,
that term?
yeah. No, so typically when a teacher
Mm-hmm.
comes, that they're oftentimes the metaphor that is used that my students are empty vessels and I'm going to pour my knowledge into them,
Yeah.
right? When we do a training, the question that oftentimes I get asked is trained to do what?
Yep.
right? So you do an unconscious bias. So you're training to do what, right? And
Hmm.
so trainers try to answer that question. I think this approach is a little bit different because you have the answers for this one. This is a practice. This this is something that we do ourselves. I am active in healing the hurts of racism. I am where I can blame something else on the trainer. They didn't tell me, or I should have known, or whatever. But this healing process is you have all the answers as a participant, and so you have to be brave enough and humble enough to actually take a hold of
Yeah.
those learnings and practice those things just like you would with any health practice or any hygiene practice. You do this on a regular enough basis that that routine becomes your habit, and then that habit becomes your character, that
Yeah.
way of your way of life, right? And so this notion that we need to be cognitive as we heal is an important thing, right? So
And I want to add that what the other pieces to be aware of is, I think what others might say is, yeah, Andre, I can do this for myself, but what if I encounter people who haven't done this and are still racist and are still the perpetrator of hate? How do I? Well, I think through this program, what we can do is learn those skills and gain those skills to address those opportunities in those situations where, and I think if people listen back 2 calls ago, I think you used a great example of the gentleman in the restaurant or the bar that you went into, right? You've obviously done this work. That gentleman has not. But you've used those skills to turn that situation around, in which, by the end of the conversation, that particular gentleman uh, said, "You know what? You're actually a good person."
mhm.
Right? And so I think that's a perfect example of when you have done the work yourself, how do you use those skills and those competencies to insert into any situation, any context? We talked about that earlier. Any context in which you find yourself in, and use those skills to address those situations and that person individually.
Yep. And another kind of tagline that we use for this healing the hurts of racism work is that competence builds confidence,
Mm-hmm.
right? Most often when we're in situations where we're seeing acts of racism or we're seeing acts of xenophobia or ageism or whatnot, we don't act because we don't have the confidence to act, and we don't have the confidence to act because we've never practiced
Yep.
how to act.
Yep.
We haven't built up the competence. We feel like we don't know enough, or we haven't
Yep.
done enough to be able to be a great advocate. I
Yep.
alluded to this earlier in my conversation. There was a time when I called myself an advocate, but nobody else did,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so can I say that I'm an ally or I'm an advocate if nobody else is saying that? And so when we're doing the work is when people will see our advocacy or they will see our allyship in the work that we do. And so this mindfulness, this healing the hurts of racism gears us up to have that confidence to confront those things in our own lives and in the wider world. If you notice on the next time you see the logo, you'll see these kind of broken circles, right? So these are concentric circles that aren't quite attached, but like these are our spheres of influence
Yeah.
that that sometimes overlap and sometimes don't, but oftentimes are broken because we don't have the confidence, or
Yeah.
we haven't had the competence, or we haven't done the practice. And so this really is about you doing the work to recognize how you have to heal, but also how you have to help others heal, because we've both been the recipients and the targets of discrimination. And again,
Yeah.
from bullying to microaggressions to
Sexism to
sexism to
yeah.
off-colored jokes, all of those things, we've either been the recipient or the target of those things.
Yeah. And what I
So that's
love about this, and folks who have been listening and kind of following us for a while, is our belief that this work is not just for your 9 to 5 professional space, right? That this work is about our personal commitment to diversity, advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in any space we walk into. And so that's what's so powerful about this for me is that these are skills that you can take into any setting, whether it is in your personal religious spaces or your professional organizations, as a leader, as a frontline staff, as a caregiver if you're in the healthcare space, as a salesperson if you're in sales. These are tools and skills that you can take into any of those spaces, and that's what we've been talking about this whole time. Is that to help advance DEIB, you do not have to be a practitioner by title, but these skills will help you be a better person, right? And so that's what I love about this particular tool and these sets of tools, Andre. And I hope that as people are visiting the tools and getting a sense for them, that they are seeing that from the work that we do too, and that we put out there is this isn't about your 9 to 5. This is about your everyday being as a person.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you coupled this with the accelerator, so we've got the accelerator, we've got healing the hurts of racism, just with those two programs, and we haven't released the other programs yet, right? But just with those two right there, you are off to a really great start in your DEIB journey, both professionally and personally. So,
Yeah.
no, I love the opportunity. Can't wait to see people's comments down below, what they think about this process and our take
Yeah.
on unraveling these systems of hurt and shame and
Yeah.
guilt and fault and all those things that are designed to trap us. Um, so
So it is about time. I know you got to go. I've got to go too, and that's why again, hence the early show here. But to Andre's left, you'll see the LinkedIn, the Facebook, the YouTube. We are all over the social network and social media. You'll see a QR code. You can certainly scan that and learn more about what we do and we offer to you as a whether you're a DIB practitioner that needs some support in this space, or an individual leader, or just individually you want to do more in this space. Learn more about what Andre and I can do for you. And then you do see every Thursday at 12 noon. Join us next week as we go live on Thursday, 12 noon next weekend. We can certainly talk more about this concept, but others as well, as we dive into supporting you and bringing you insights into diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Any last words, Andre?
no, I just position heal thyself. All right, with that, I want to say thanks so much. I'll see you next week, Laura.
All right. Thank you so much, Andre.